Until January, Steven Fulop was the mayor of Jersey City. Now he runs the partnership for New York City. So I have to ask you, taxes is all we hear about these days. Yeah. A tax for this, a tax for that. There's still no budget agreement in the city and the state, but I wonder how the partnership views all of these discussions about taxing this person, taxing that person, another way to raise money.
I think the partnership's position would be that the moment around competitiveness is sometimes lost in the conversation, and there's a deliberate effort from other states to attract business from New York. And when you're constantly talking about a different tax every single week, we need to try to set the record straight. And so, you know, if you ask me if I had my choice starting in January, would I be talking about other issues, just not taxes consistently? I'd probably tell you yes. But unfortunately, kind of this is an important moment, and that's what we're talking about.
But I guess the question is this: when you talk to the mayor, the mayor says, well, I've talked to people who are rich. This is on the tax the rich proposal. And they say paying another $20,000 a year in taxes is no big deal, and they support it. But I'm not sure that that's the message that people around in the city and in this state are getting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a fair soundbite. It would be the equivalent of me saying I've spoken to people that are economically challenged, and they say they don't want to tax rich, so that's the reason I'm doing this. The reality is that when you look at the jobs data, it is a fragile environment. When you look at the city's budget, you don't really have a revenue problem. The budget has grown faster than inflation over the last 10 years, and you never have government take a pragmatic look at programs that don't work. Never happens in government. You only say those are programs that others are doing. Let's add it on top of the existing programs. So we're just advocating for some responsibility here, and I think that's kind of the important nuance of the conversation.
You know, it's really interesting that you say that there's no money problem, no revenue problem, because a lot of the budget experts that I speak to say the same thing. But when you listen to the mayor says he doesn't want to cut services because that will affect people, and he says working people. And I guess the question is, aren't there cuts that can be made that don't affect people's services, that go to efficiency?
Look, I was a mayor for 12 years. The reality is that there are programs that you start that just don't work the way you originally envisioned. And government does a very poor job of recognizing that and scaling that back. In the private sector, you're constantly doing that. You're assessing whether something is meeting the objective when you start out. Think about the city FEPS program, which has been discussed.
Yes.
I mean, but if the mayor was sitting here, he would tell you that, you know, I'm no longer for scaling up that program as proposed by the city council.
Yet he promised to do it during the campaign,
but he promised,
which has given him a lot of aggravation over the last several months.
But take a step further than that, right? New York City is unique with that FEPS program because it's an entitlement program. It's important to provide the service, but no other city in the country provides an entitlement service like that, because most of the time entitlement programs are done at the state and federal level. That program is growing at 4% per month, as we know.
Believe me, I know.
So the question then comes in, is it the right place to have that program at the city level to begin with? Forget about scaling that up. The existence of the program, does it belong in the city or the state or the federal? I mean, there's plenty of examples like that where you could talk through whether something is effective as initially intended, and then you have a constructive conversation.
But see, you have to ask this question. So there's 65,000 families right now that get city FEPS grants, vouchers. And the reason I think they did it was because there was no aid coming from Washington. So now you have a situation where it's unlikely that Washington is going to give you money to pay that for that program. It now costs $1.24 billion a year, a big ask also from the state. So you can't really cut it because the state's not going to give you another $1.24 billion. The Fed's certainly not going to give it to you. So what do you do?
It is impossible in the construct of a municipal government for a municipal budget to pick up every single expense that the federal government will no longer cover. I mean, even if it's a good program.
Do you think that city and state officials realize that?
Well, I think they certainly do. And you ask yourself, okay, where does this belong? If it's no longer provided by the federal government, it should belong at the state. The original program was provided by the state, and then Cuomo cut it and de Blasio implemented it. But you get it at this local level, but you get into the conversation of, does it belong still residing at the state, at the city versus the state? And those are questions that you need to address when you talk about kind of the budget gap. The budget gap has shrunk from 12 billion to 9 billion to 5 billion to 3 billion now. That is largely on the backs of the financial services sector and corporate America that is driving much of the revenue growth here. If you chase them away because you constantly have this cadence of taxes and it's a competitive environment, the outcome will be that less opportunity for money, for services, for lower income New Yorkers. And that's just kind of an important point to kind of hammer home, because we're all for a more affordable New York. The question is, how do you get there?
Yeah, but the question then becomes, where do you raise the money if you are hesitant to cut services? And even though the mayor has said he's looking for $1.7 billion in service reductions in the size of the city budget, that's nothing.
Well, look, they argue around the city council speaker proposed elimination of jobs that are not filled right now. And that became a contentious point on whether that's the right thing to do. But I think a reasonable person would say, well, there's nobody in the job today, and we are functioning. Why not cut it? Okay,
right. Makes sense.
But some of this stuff creates kind of political pushback from the mayor's base, and I think part of leadership is willing at times to disrupt your base a little bit and say, I understand your perspective, but let me speak a little bit about a different perspective on the way I see it based on the executive position I'm in today.
Well, but so everybody's talking about the idea of affordability, and the governor herself has given money to New York City, $1.4 billion just on the top of it. She's paying for universal child care, and she's proposed a pied-à-terre tax, which is, I know, highly unpopular with your group. But I guess the question becomes
Can we talk about that maybe? There's why it's unpopular?
Sure.
Well, I recognize the soundbite around taxing oligarchs and Saudi princesses. Fine, let's put that aside for a second.
Don't forget him.
I think it's inappropriate to get in front of a person's house personally. You're the mayor, you're above that. I don't think that was the right thing to do, especially in an environment that we have today. But if you take a step back and you recognize the fact that the budget is disproportionately paid by the wealthiest people in New York, right? It's not even close, okay? Now, if you think about, let's say, a gym membership, for example, let's take a step back and just talk about the private sector, right? The best customer that a gym membership has is the person that signs up on January 2nd, says, I'm going to get fit for the whole year, pays the whole year of dues, and doesn't come, okay? Now, you have some people here that employ thousands of people, that they have a crash pad, essentially, because the headquarters isn't here. They don't use the hospital system, the police system, the school system,
the subways.
Nothing, the subways, but they're paying already a huge amount. So why would you crowd that person out? Why would you chase that person out?
That's the exact logic that they're using to tax that person, because the logic that the governor said was, well, they come here and they use our services, so we should make them pay.
Well, what is the services they use? What is the services they use?
I hear what you're saying.
So that by nature of the definition of the residents, they're not using the service. So what is the service that they use? I think that I get the politics of it. I totally understand that you can poll taxing the rich. It's the reason that when you go to a rally, the base is chanting tax the rich, and they're not chanting fund childcare, because sometimes it's about being punitive, right? But it's the responsibility of the elected officials to be adults in the conversation and say, we don't need to be punitive. We need to find solutions here. So I would say that going full circle, going to Ken Griffin's house at nighttime in the dark and pointing it out by name felt more punitive than it did solutions oriented.
Okay, we're gonna have to leave it right there for now. Up next, the boys, they're back. Back with Steve Fulop, but I want to ask you this. You know, the governor seems to be between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, New York City is the financial engine of the state. The mayor likes to make the argument that New York City contributes 51% of the revenue, but gets 44% back, and he wants more of that. But the governor has a whole state to run, and she has to deal with a lot of areas that don't have as much money as New York City, and yet she's given New York City an awful lot of money. Do you think she's reaching the point where she says, enough is enough, no more taxes?
I think the governor's been tremendously generous. I think that when you are the governor of a big state like this, there are a lot of hands out. I think she expresses that well. And I think that, in a leadership position, she's saying that, the city needs to make some responsible decisions and changes. And that's, I think, a healthy conversation.
So we're talking about cutting.
Yeah, I think you need to map out a pathway that is a responsible budget that is fair, the affordability at the core, but recognizing that not every program is sustainable long term. And you see some of these things that are even being proposed now around, free childcare and free trains and free buses and subsidies and supermarkets. I mean, it sounds great, but there's a reality to budgets. And I think that, her point, if she was sitting here, would be we need to be responsible and thoughtful about that.
So let's just switch gears for a little bit. You've just taken over the partnership. Yeah. And you want to change the way the partnership functions. Yeah. You've talked about the fact that you have 800,000 employees that work for the companies that are part of the partnership. Yep. How do you want to use them, and how will you leverage what they have to do and represent to make your case in Albany, in New York, et cetera?
Look, I think that the opportunity for the partnership is around those 800,000 employees in how we communicate with them about issues. Most people are not in tune with what city FEPS is, or grocery stores that are free, or the nuance of public policy, but the public policy on the local level impacts them in a very, very real way. So how do we communicate with them, and how do we organize them? Look, I think sometimes in the tax rhetoric, and I think the mayor would tell you this, is that we have a very positive relationship. We talk regularly and meet regularly, and the goal for the business community is really to find common ground on where we can work together. And I think there's a lot of opportunities around housing. We're very pro-growth, and he is pro-growth on housing. The child care conversation is one that is very, very important. The competitiveness, artificial intelligence is going to be a challenge for all of us over the next year. Yes. So there are places, once we get through this budget, that I think you're going to see a much more constructive kind of relationship between the mayor and the business community. I'm just hopeful that we get through this in a way that doesn't continue to damage the competitiveness.
So I guess the thing that I wonder is this is a mayor who has mobilized his base, and he has them knocking on doors and lobbying for certain issues like a rent freeze. Are you able to mobilize the 800,000 people who work for the corporations you represent to do the same kind of thing?
I don't think it's the same sort of energy and the same sort of activist and the same sort of person. The common thread is that they all vote, okay? And so it's just a matter of communicating with them. The good thing about those 800,000 employees are that they are consumer of news, that they are consumers of information, and if you provide them facts and information, they will make probably decisions that are centrist and responsible in many ways, because they're not ideologues for the most part. You have, of course, fringes within that world, but I think the opportunity is not to create an army that's going to rival the DSA in the sense of knocking on doors. The opportunity is to organize 800,000 that they're informed and they feel engaged and invested in New York City in a different way.
And they vote.
And they vote. Like I said, they're going to vote. I feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to mobilize people to vote.
So that becomes a lobbying arm in and of itself, because when you talk to people in elected office, you have that army of 800,000 people behind you.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're never going to get 800,000. It's a dream. I think that if you get into the six figures, which I'm pretty sure we'll do comfortably, you're going to rival any union or any organization in the city. And the important thing is that this corporate community that is part of the partnership is in many ways a backbone of the employment and the dollars that come into the coffers.
And the taxes.
Yeah, and so it's really important that, the position of the business community is not, don't hurt me too bad. That's not a good starting point. That's not fair. And so we talk about really how to help the city in a responsible way so that New York is competitive across the country.
So once we get through these budget problems, which is going to take a few weeks, what are the issues that you want the partnership to focus on? I know you've talked about anti-Semitism for one.
Yeah, I mean, look, anti-Semitism is one that a lot of the leadership and employees do care about. I think the biggest issues for us are going to be around how do you keep New York City competitive on the job front? Okay, so that's number one, front and center. Attracting jobs, attracting businesses here, and that's beyond just taxes. That's a comprehensive plan. I think we do need to work with the mayor around kind of artificial intelligence and the job disruption that's going to be happening over the next 6 months to a year. And then look, the mayor cares very much about childcare. The governor yesterday came to the partnership. She spoke to us about childcare. And
she cares about it as well.
She cares very much about it. And the partnership, for the most part, most of our employers provide some sort of childcare, whether on-site, off-site, tax credits, some form. And so we have an expertise and knowledge of it. How do we engage in a constructive way to help this kind of be a model for the country?
What about short-term rentals? I think that's an issue that your people are interested in.
Look, I've engaged in only the short-term rental conversation because I think it's relevant to the affordability crisis around the World Cup and exemption. I don't think you're going to see the partnership engaging in issues that don't touch all 300 members. So the short-term rental one is not something on a long-term basis.
You're just worried about it because of the people coming here?
Yeah, in the near term, there's a near-term opportunity for a month to relax that law that people can rent their apartments. I think that kind of makes sense. I mean, the government is not really there today, but I think that's very short-sighted.
So what do you think the partnership should be doing in terms of hate crimes and hate and anti-Semitism? Because there's a lot of hate in this city right now.
I think the speaker was right as a starting point around the buffer zone bills. We were supporters of those. Was the mayor wrong to veto the part that has to do with schools? Look, you know, again, I've been in that seat. I think it's complicated. I think you could find a justification for a lot of reasons you could find if you want to achieve an end goal. For me, I would have signed it, but he had his reasons. You know, the hope is that, from my standpoint, that the speaker brings perhaps a different version of that bill. I don't necessarily think it's productive to force the override. I get the politics of that, but I think you're going to get a more divided relationship between the mayor and the city council as a result of that, which isn't healthy for either side. But I do think the buffer zone in certain educational facilities is an important thing to pass, and I hope that it does come back in some form.
See, the mayor's position on that was that he wants to support the campus demonstrations and things like that you saw at Columbia and other schools, CUNY and other schools.
I mean, those were dangerous. They were anti-Semitic. Jewish students felt like they couldn't walk to class. The buffer zone education bill, if you take a step back, this is the reason why I would not have vetoed it, is all it did was allow the police commissioner to draft a plan around what a buffer zone is for safety, okay? So it's not even saying 25 feet, 50 feet, 200 feet. You're talking about allowing an executive that you yourself appointed, so you have a relationship with this person, who's ever in that seat, to craft a plan. So to me, that wasn't so complicated and didn't infringe on first. But look, he had unions and he had some of his political base that obviously pushed back on it. Totally fine. The hope is that the speaker and the council bring back some version of that to get the end objective achieved.
Is there a way to find a new version of that that doesn't make the people who protested on college campuses feel that they're a target?
I think the people that protested in the examples that you use, a lot of them were anti-Semitic. A lot of it is rooted in that. Okay?
Yes, they were.
The unions that are protesting a contract or outside of a hospital, or a teaching hospital, so to speak, you don't want them to get caught up in First Amendment rights. So I understand that. I think there definitely is a way to achieve both. I'm not necessarily sure that the mayor's supporters would be supportive of any version of it.
They probably would not.
Yeah, but the hope is that that's where leadership comes in, when you're able to say to your base that, you know, I hear what you're saying and I understand the politics of it, but you're not necessarily right on this issue.
Steven Fulop, hope to see you again soon. Thank you for joining me here.
Thank you.
And thank you at home for joining us as well.